Good evening all, and welcome. The holiday season is certainly upon us, with many of us going to see families and spending time together and relaxing. However, there are some who are not as fortunate. Some who still have to work and have to endure the horrors that humanity throws at them. It's time to get ready, get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. I had been an EMT for less than a year when we got a call for a car flipped on the highway. While en route, dispatch tells us it's a convertible. 2 victims and no seatbelts. I am expecting total gore. As we roll up to the scene, I see a brand new Ford Mustang convertible, smashed, and its top blocking the off-ramp. It's about 30 feet down the ramp from the main highway. Seeing no bodies on the roadway, I immediately assume it's going to be a mess inside the car. I grab a flashlight and a trauma bag and jump out of the rig. As I approach the Mustang convertible, I see one of our police officers and 2 teenage guys. They're standing in a semicircle talking quietly, as people often do at the scene of a grisly accident. I wave to the officer and climb down on my knees to look into the smashed Mustang. No one is in the car. Not a drop of blood. Nothing. I turn around and look at the cop and silently mouth something to the effect of, "What?" He waves me over to where he's standing and introduces me to the victims. The 2 guys idly chatting with our police officer had been in the car. Also, they were not buckled in and completely unharmed from the accident. At first, I thought he was kidding. It took him telling me a couple of times before I could believe him. One of the guys had scraped his knuckles on some busted windshield glass crawling out through the wreckage. So we did get to perform some first aid. Turns out, when they tried to make the exit ramp after the part where it peels away from the highway, they discovered that the soil and grass that normally fills that void was replaced with a huge trench to address drainage problems. Sort of the highway department's version of the Folgers challenge. The nose of the car dropped into the trench, and they scrubbed off a bunch of speed, and then the car flipped gently enough that they were unhurt. No one got hurt, and that is a miracle when it comes to my job. I used to work as an EMT in my hometown while in high school. It was a small town where just about everyone knew each other, and that was one of my biggest fears while working in the ambulance. Getting a call from a friend and having to watch them die. One night we get a call for a hit and run, so we get out of there as quickly as we can, only to realize it was a wedding reception for a guy I had played football with, who had just graduated the year before. What had happened was someone at the reception decided they were okay to drive home, when clearly they were not. So the groom and his father decided to try and stop him after he had gotten into his truck. The driver decided to throw it in reverse and floor it with the 2 men hanging onto his truck. Eventually, the groom's leg got caught onto the truck and he broke his femur, and his father had somehow fallen under the truck but not gotten hurt, other than a few scratches. Anyway, we had 2 ambulances come to the scene just before we had 2 patients, and weren't sure of the severity. So the other ambulance loads up the groom and takes him to the nearest major hospital to try and save his leg that was already turning black. The father went with us to the local hospital, and everyone involved was drunk off their rockers, and he was not happy. On the short 5-minute ride to the hospital, he made some pretty awful remarks such as, "You guys are Nazis," and repeatedly shouted racist obscenities. Now this is a small Wisconsin town, and we have all of one black doctor in the whole hospital. Guess who was on that night? We get him into the ER and have him strapped down on a backboard. As soon as he sees the doctor, he starts screaming at him, saying he better not touch him, along with a whole load of other things. So to avoid confrontation, he calls in the other ER doctor on call, who stays at home until he's called in, so it took a while to get him there. In the meantime, our friend in the ER somehow got himself unbuckled from his backboard, which held him down with 4 straps and his arms inside, and ran out into the main area of the ER, finds our ER doctor and gives him a nice hard punch in the eye, and proceeds to run outside. We did have an officer with us because of how belligerent he had been, so the officer pursued him into the parking lot and arrested him. I found out the next day the groom had also lost his leg from the accident, since the nearest major hospital was about 30 minutes away. So when we go lights and sirens, when they got there the leg was completely dead from about halfway up to the femur down. That call always kind of bothered me, because it was someone that I knew quite well, and here he was having everything going perfectly well for him, and in one night he loses his leg for the rest of his life. Just kind of sucks. I was an EMT, working for a New Jersey-based ambulance company, working in New York. My company specialized in a lot of hard-to-do cases for the major insurance companies. For example, medical transfers from international flights and over-the-road long-distance medical travel. I did a lot of that. New York has some of the best cancer hospitals, and some people wouldn't be able to take the air pressure. Once, I spent 3 days in the ambulance making a trip from New York to Florida and back. But one day, we were dropping off a patient at New York's Bellevue Hospital, which is the best hospital for trauma, but as soon as you're out of recovery, they transfer you to any other hospital. You could have any homeless guy just off the street, or be cuffed to a bed, or someone who's been stabbed and is hitting you, or anything that's moving. And we decided to check out the new ER entrance that they just finished, and was standing near the table with coffee and cookies, when I would notice that one cop car would arrive, and then another, and then an ambulance would show up, and there would just be more guys just milling around with no patience and these funny smiles on their faces. I asked one cop if I should move my ambulance, and he said no, but we should stay here to see what's coming. Sure enough, an ambulance pulls up, backs into the dock, and the driver gets out to open the rear doors, and his face is blood red from trying to keep from laughing. He opens the doors and pops out a 6'4" rail with a thin Spanish guy with full-on makeup and lipstick in a pink bathrobe. He's holding up his chin as he walks by with his head held high, and he comes out on a stretcher. There's a guy on his knee with his ass up in the air holding the sheet tight over his head so you can't see his face. As he goes by, one of the EMT holds up the sheet so everyone can see. Apparently the Spanish guy was doing his friend in the arse, with a large Barbie doll head first, with the doll's arms tied down with rubber bands, and the rubber bands broke, and the doll's arms popped out to their usual positions in the guy's arse, and it was stuck there. Everyone was silent until they passed, and then the whole place erupted with laughter. One cop almost lost his cookies, he was so shocked. This is the story of my friend, who is an EMT, and the green slushy. I was working with a brand new probation one night. Why do shit jobs always happen at night? It was the same old crap, job after job. Sore tummies, sore heads, blah blah blah. So it was no surprise to get our next call to a PV bleed. Medical abbreviation for per vagina. There really isn't much to it with these cases, except to monitor blood pressure, skin perfusion, and levels of consciousness. We rock up outside the address, which was a festy, dingy block of flats out in southwest Sydney. The place stank. All of these units seemed to have the same stale smell in every flat. Rubbish in the stairwells, cat shit all over the place, old mattresses on the front lawn and driveways. It really was a ghetto. I knocked on this lady's door, only to be greeted with a gruff "doors open." What I saw next was enough to make me want to leave immediately. There was amongst the filth of a cockroach-infested cesspit that someone called a lounge room, and perched up on the lounge was this manky, grimy, nauseating, hairy 52-year-old greasy woman, naked from the waist down. I started to feel sick. Her legs were spread open for all and sundry to see, exposing what could only be best described as an oozing, swollen red, inflamed, purulent mass of a reproductive organ that seemed to be harboring the most vulgar infection known to man. Suffice to say, her hygiene habits weren't the best either. The dirt under her toenails could have filled a small pot. The cat hair stuck to the bottom of her feet could have clothed 3 homeless kids. I could go on, but anyway. She stank. The vile stench of body odor filled the room and immediately infected our nostrils and clothes. You could feel the smell in the air. It was heavy, and you just knew with every moment and breath that stuff was infecting every part of you. Yuck. I felt dirty. I felt infected. She started droning on about not changing it soon enough, and now it hurts. What on earth are you talking about? I said. With that, she reached down and grabbed something, which I had not yet noticed among the ooze and slime of her genitals. A string. My God, no. It could only mean one thing, and her next comment confirmed my worst nightmare. I put it up there 9 months ago, and now it won't come out, she squirms. Note to all women, change your tampon daily. Many times a day, in fact. Please. Jesus. 9 whole months to fester away in the warm, wet, infection-harboring environment that every germ loves if left free to roam. It's surprising it hasn't killed her yet. She began to tug hard on the string, her face grimacing with pain. I yelled out, trying to make her stop, but she just kept on going and going, as if intent to remove the foreign object. Then, as if Murphy's and his bloody laws were ever present, it happened. Just like a champagne bottle being popped. But it wasn't champagne. Out it comes, dangling from the end of the string, a slimy, dripping, infected 9-month-old tampon that had spawned a life of its own. Now, common obstetrics will tell you that with every birth comes, cue the music, afterbirth. That's right, my friends. Out of this gaping, infested hole poured this fluid. Not just any fluid. Oozing lumps of slimy, fluorescent greeny yellow infection. Enough to fill a cup. Oh my god, the smell. It would put Middle Eastern chemical warfare to shame. My poor probationer gasps, gags, and proclaims disgust. Shit. My sentiments exactly. An angelic look of relief came across her face, as if she had just found her own private nirvana. Oh, that feels good, she moaned. Okay, I said quickly. You won't be needing us anymore. I ran out of that place as fast as I could. My probationer stood grounded and in shock. What about the patient? I hear him exclaim. Screw the patient, I said. There's no way that thing is getting in my ambulance. I see him nod in agreement from down the hall. See your doctor in the morning, madam. And with that, he was hot on my heels. As for the smell, it took hours to get the smell out of the car, carried via our clothes. I literally destroyed my uniform via incineration and ordered a new one. Never again did I go to that address. I had contingencies in place to remove me from duty if her number ever came up again, but fortunately for me, it never did. Never again do I wish to encounter such a vile and horrific display of slush. This is a promise, and I intend to keep it. I haven't been employed yet, but I am a nationally and state certified EMTB, and I did a shift during my semester of class where I got to learn a lot, but I did also see something pretty tragic. We responded to a domestic abuse call where the guy, who the woman said she had been dating since high school, hit her right in the face, leaving her with a big gash over her eye and their baby before he left. We didn't end up doing much other than treating the wound, since she declined going to the hospital. So before long we were back on the rig. I felt pissed at the guy. Hitting your partner, especially with a kid around, is a scummy thing to do. So I figured that was the end of it. A sad story in a big city. But later that night, we also got a call from around the same area. I didn't get specifics, but the paramedics were moving in fast, so I knew something was up. We get to an apartment complex nearby, and pull up to a scene full of cop cars by a chain link fence. Soon enough, I saw a body hanging from the fence by its neck. I had seen dead bodies at funerals, but never so soon after death. But that's not what got to me. What did was that it was the body of the boyfriend who hit the woman at the start of the story. I don't know a damn thing about their lives, but seeing 3 lives torn to shreds in that moment floored me. Knowing that someone was going to have to wake up that mum and tell her that her boyfriend was dead, that her child didn't have a father anymore. It made me feel helpless. It felt bad for thinking how much of a scumbag the guy was before I'd ever seen him in person, and now I was looking at his corpse. But in a way, I'm glad I saw a body on my first night. and it didn't make me want to stop doing the job. Man, I have some stories. So, the first ones are problems with no-no places. My first 2 gunshot wounds as a new paramedic were to the male genitalia. The first guy was shot in the bits over a girl. Couldn't find the source of the bleeding at first, and I was worried it might have been the femoral artery. And I was looking at his other wounds when my partner says, you gotta see this. You won't believe it. Perfect hole through his junk. I could have put my pinky through it had I been so inclined, but I wasn't. The second one was some wannabe white gangbanger who was posing in front of a mirror with a gun down his pants, and it went off. .40 caliber blew apart his testicles. I think that's a Darwin Award, isn't it? Finally, I got a call for worms in a vagina. Turned out to be pinworms. Pretty normal. Kid just needs antibiotics. What makes it memorable is the dispatcher trying to give us the call information while holding back laughter, and the mum meeting me at the front door with one crushed on her finger, shoving it in my face. Ew, lady. I'm not an entomologist. Another fun one. One kid decided to mix LSD and MDMA. He was buck naked, covered in scratch marks, and trying to jump out of a 3rd floor window when I arrived. It took 5 of us to strap him down and get him out the door. The whole time, he's raving about dinosaurs and molecules and oh my god, you guys. Another girl was at a music festival and was taken into the aid station because her friends were concerned when she kept masturbating for several hours and wouldn't stop. My buddy had to drive her to the hospital and said that no shit, every 7 minutes or so, she'd go at it again. Never found out what she was on. We had a case of raised from the dead on a diabetic lady. And after she was fine, as we were leaving, we asked her, "Is there anything else you need before we go?" She replies, "Well, as long as you're here, the house could use with a vacuuming." On another occasion, my crew pulled a lady out of a house fire a couple of years ago. I'd randomly taken a vacation day, or I would have made the grab. I did get to see her a few days later when she was out of the hospital. She came by the station to get a free smoke detector. I poked my head in to see her, and wow, damn. She was pissed because the investigation discovered the fire was caused by an illegal remodel or something like that, and they got fined for it. And somehow, it's our fault for saving her life. We also had a guy whose car slid under a semi in front of the rear tires and was dragged a couple of 100 feet, and it looked bad. Took us almost an hour to get the weight of this semi off the car and pull it out. And no shit, the guy had one tiny cut to his eyebrow. That was it. He walked into the ambulance after, and we had to cut the car from around him. I told him he needed to buy a lottery ticket after he got discharged. The most embarrassing story for me was at the scene of a structure fire midsummer, 3 in the afternoon, and we've been running all day with no stop or no lunch. I'm beat before we even get started. We're initially assigned to the exterior, and we're pulling soffits and generally working our tails off. After about 15 minutes, they have it knocked down and I'm ready for rehab. Instead, we get assigned to relieve the interior crew, and I know I'm not doing good, and figure I can make it, so we go inside and start overhaul. I'm toasted by the time we get to the 2nd floor. Finally, I break down and request rehab. No response. I'm swaying. I'm thinking to myself, the fire's pretty well out. Let's get closer to the door so we can go back downstairs. By this time, my partner knows I'm in trouble and has cracked a nozzle to send cool water down my back. Not helping. Again, I call for rehab, and as soon as I see them outside, we exit. I'm trying to make it across the street to rehab, and my vision is going grey. Funny what runs through your mind. All I can think of is, don't pass out on the street. You might chip a tooth. Make it over, and I'm trying to get my shit off. Someone notices I'm swaying and freaking out. Next thing I know, I'm being very purposefully undressed by 4 to 5 burly firefighters without my consent, and barely held onto my pants. And people are dumping ice water on me. I'm trying to say I'm okay, but no one's listening. I get marched over to the ambulance with a firefighter on either side of me. Best part is that the goddamn paper published a photo of me being led away. I'm shirtless, with bright red back, no shoes, and look like the firefighters are ejecting a bum from a party. So I get to the ER and try and find the best way to phrase a text to my wife to let her know I need a ride home from the ER without panicking her. When I get a text from her to let me know she was on the way to the ER to pick up my son, who had been a passenger in a car that got T-boned and was brought in by some of my buddies right before I was. My reply? Please drive very defensively. We are under a gypsy curse. We'll explain when you get here. Everyone was okay. Just a freaky coincidence. I am an EMT. I personally don't have any stories as bad as some of my colleagues who are first responders, and I've heard many stories on both ends of the spectrum from what I have. I think the worst call anyone would have is a SIDS job. On a lighter note, my most memorable is the following. To preface the story, I have to tell you about one of my old usual crew members. Let's call him Mike. Mike was a small guy, but absolutely hysterical. Always made everybody laugh. He also loved to recount the 2 stories of when the call goes out and he was feeling lazy, saying, "This guy better be bleeding out of his ass." That patient was calling for rectal bleeding, and another time when this patient better be in cardiac arrest, which it was. So I picked up food with my crew. There's 4 of us, you see, and we're starving, and I also feel most funny stories start this way. We get our food back to base, set it up on the table, and lick our lips and rub our hands, in the most comical fashion, to prepare ourselves for a feast. Then the emergency line rings. We all groan, look at the crew member I mentioned above and say, "Don't you say it, Mike." And he goes, "Well, this guy better be bleeding out his dick." The caller then tells us that the patient broke his catheter. Thankfully, no blood or any serious emergency. Nice guy too. But that sheer moment of, oh shit, was more than enough to never make me forget that job. A few years back, I was working midnights on an ambulance in an area with a stupidly high crime rate and a ridiculous call volume. Every shift was draining enough as it is, and on top of it all, we had just recently lost one of our brother medics under some pretty tragic circumstances, and we were all still finding our own ways to deal with it. But anyway, budgets being what they are and all, my partner and I got stuck every shift in this ancient decrepit piece of shit I will only refer to as an ambulance in air quotations. For privacy's sake, let's call it the Octo. I've never hated anything as much as I've hated the Octo. Here are a few reasons why. No matter what we tried, the inside of it smelled of a foot. It had no air conditioning. It had a hole in the floor between the driver and the passenger seat that seemed to grow larger every shift. We once pulled out the station to take a call, and the driver's side front tire fell off. It literally fell off. It would stall out and die the second you took your foot off the gas, and when we got to the location of our calls, we would have to wedge our spare O2 tank over the gas pedal to make sure it was running when we came up with our patient. It actually caught fire more than once, including once with a critical patient in the back. Long story short, I've had some of the most messed up calls in my life in that truck. But the day finally came when we got set for a new rig. Not brand new, but new to us. And everything was going to be better than that goddamn Octo. More importantly, tomorrow morning, the tow truck was coming to cart off Octo to the special section of ambulance hell it had spent the better part of the past decade earning its passage to. We were the midnight turn, so when we arrived for the shift at 6, I immediately got to check out the new rig I had longed for. My partner, on the other hand, is calmly searching through the extricational equipment until he finds a sledge he liked. He picks it up, tests it, and calmly strolls towards the Octo. Not a word was said between the two of us, and none needed to be. He found a nice sledge and followed suit, grabbing a pry bar for good measure. His first swings took out one of the headlights, and mine took out the other, then the windshield, and so on. The sound of shattering glass and denting steel, alongside the screamed obscenities and howling laughter coming from the two hammer-wielding lunatics, inevitably attracted the attention of our immediate superiors, who had not realized we were still on the premises. Our normally straight-laced, calm under pressure, relaxed bossman, a 20-plus year veteran of EMS and fire service, stepped out of the bay doors with his face frozen, and the most hilarious look of shock and disgust that I've ever seen. I will never forget for as long as I live the look on his face as his head sadly slid to the side. He buried his face in his hands and went back into the building, only to emerge about 3 seconds later with a hammer of his own. The three of us beat onto that truck until we could barely lift the hammer again, laughing until we cried and could hardly breathe, only to catch our breath and let loose with some crazed war cry and attack it again. It may have been the most cathartic moment of my life. Every call that went to shit, every full arrest, every horrible ped calls, every steaming pile of human wreckage, every 500-pound patient, every fire, flood, train wreck, car crash, gunshot, structure fire, every violent 1096, depressing arse-failed suicide attempt, every bloody mess, every idiotic overdose, every asshole on his 7th heart attack, every annoying bullshit call at 3 a.m, along with anything and everything else I had ever bottled up, came out right there and then. The three of us sat there for a while right in the middle of the shattered safety glass, smashed pieces of this and that right next to the dented and twisted remains of the now almost hollowed out ambulance, and we just laughed like lunatics. Nobody said a word. We just laughed. We just sat and laughed. It felt good. As a paramedic, I responded to an unknown call in a small neighborhood that was on the far edge of a municipality, but was technically an incorporated county jurisdiction. We walked into the house. After about a minute, that the local fire department showed up. We walked in and find them doing CPR on a woman with a gunshot hole in her heart. Normally we're told if there's a gun involved, we let the cops in first, but the cops are over 20 minutes away because of the jurisdiction bullshit, and no one told us that there would be a gun. We say stop. We're not working on a dead body, especially one that's been there for over an hour. Then I say, wait, who dialed 911? When I turn around, I see a little girl that everyone had missed. This 5-year-old girl had been watching SpongeBob when her mum capped herself in the next room over. When the show was over, she went and found her mum. Then she picked up the phone and called her dad, who was 100 miles away at work, and told him that Mummy wasn't moving and that there was blood. Then she waited for all the bureaucracy of interagency dispatching to happen, and another 10 minutes for us to show up and ignore her. As soon as I saw her, I just picked her up and gave her a big hug and took her outside. I put us out of service and sat on the front porch with her until her dad got home. I gave her a stuffed animal that we happened to have with us, and I sat and talked with her. I think she knew what was happening and was just strong enough to deal with it at 5 years old. That sucked. I think every cop, fireman and medic at the scene cried that night. Fast forward to 12 hours. We get a call to the same address for a behavioral problem. A different shift of cops has shown up because someone complained about someone making noises in their backyard. We walk in and some asshole cop gives me this report. This is bullshit. He's trying to kill himself. So I put him on a 5150 hold and you have to take him down to the hospital. A 5150 hold is a 72 mandatory suicide watch in a secure facility. The guy pipes up with, "I'm not trying to kill myself, damn it. My wife died this morning and I'm just grieving. I need to be with my daughter. I need to stay with my family." At this point, the cops had already made Grandpa pick the daughter up and go elsewhere. I said to the cop, "Look, I was here this morning. This was awful. The last thing this guy needs is to be put on hold. That won't do anyone any good. Let's be reasonable here." Then he got into my face and yelled at me and my partner, "Are you going to take him or do I need to arrest you?" Long story short, we had to take him against his will away from his family because he was grieving for his recently dead wife. I filed complaints with my agency, his department, and the county, and told the hospital what happened. When the cops showed up at the hospital, the doctors were chewing him up on one side and down on the other, and said he was no longer welcome there. That was over 5 years ago, and I still pray for that little girl. Also, I was denied a PTSD for that call. That problem has since been resolved. I also have a more light-hearted story. We showed up to a car on the side of the road, with the cops questioning a guy who wouldn't give any straight answers, and a woman who couldn't breathe. She's coughing really hard, and she's turning blue. She's panicking. It's not good. We're having trouble getting any info, and she's freaking out and about to pass out. So my partner steps in front of the cops and gets in this guy's face and says, "If you don't tell us what happened, she's gonna die and it will be your fault." So he breaks down in tears and tells the story. They were driving down the road and thought a little road ahead would be good. After all, when isn't it? So she starts going to town, and as she goes down, his speed goes up. Eventually he gets to the point of no return and, well, you know how sometimes when the road crosses the railroad tracks and the road goes up a bit, and you should go across them slowly. Well, just as he blows his load, they hit that track crossing, and the car, which was going at over 80 miles an hour, jumps up, sending her head down into his lap and his spooge down into her throat and trachea. As she accidentally deep throats, he loves it and goes harder. And thus, we get back to us on the side of the road, trying to stand up over our laughter. We shot a little saline into her throat to help suction his man juice out, and she was able to breathe a bit better. No, I didn't get a roadhead on the way to the hospital. I'm not an EMT, but my dad was back in the late 80s. We live very close to Detroit Metro Airport, and he still did back at the time. This was before I was born. I was curious, so I asked him if he responded to Flight 255, the crash that happened there in 1987. He was on duty at the time when they got the call. They got there, and there was already airport emergency staff there because the crash happened literally right outside the airport limits. He and his partner were told to help out the airport emergency guys in any way they could. A guy eventually came up to him with a roll of yellow tape. He asked, what was the tape for? The guy told him to walk around the crash scene and start marking any and all body parts that he could find. So that's what he did. He went around looking for limbs of the people that died in the crash and marked them with yellow tape. There was only one survivor on that flight, and it was an infant girl. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Big shout out to all you brave and strong EMTs, all the emergency services people that are going to be working these holidays. You guys are awesome, and you have my deepest and profoundest respect. Also, I have taken your poll into consideration, and I've already actually recorded the unboxing video. I've actually already done a face reveal. Some of you guys said, finally a face reveal. Well, there's a link to my second channel if you want to see it before, but I assume that video will go up at some point tomorrow, along with the regular broadcasting. So keep an eye out for that. If you don't want to see my face, don't watch tomorrow's little bonus video. But anyway, if you did enjoy tonight's video, please do not forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. It really does go a long way. Something else you could do that would be pretty awesome would be to hit the subscribe button and press the little bell icon for good measure to be notified every time I upload. I think that would be pretty cool, so you don't miss your nightly spooks. If there's a story that you wish to share, feel free to send it to my email or alternatively post it to my Reddit. Either are fine and both can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.